Welcome back to the Power of Coffee. Where are we now in the story? Okay, so Detective Angela Gatton has gone to see the only suspect she has in Lumley's case, okay? The incident that led to her suffering a concussion and later on dying. Her name is Claire Didier, and Detective Gatton has gone to see her at her workplace. And she's asking her about Lumley, if she has seen her before, and this and that. But Claire Didier is a bit curious as to why the detective is asking those questions. So that's where we are now in the story. Let's continue. Okay, so Claire asked her this. Why are you asking me this? Angela went mute for a minute, thinking about an appropriate response, in order not to give anything away. She couldn't reveal that Lumley was no more. No. Else she might just deny everything, and then she would have lost her only solid lead in the case. Because she left the job, and we think that someone or something must have upset her. Because she left the job, and we think that someone or something must have upset her. I'm sorry for whatever she was going through, Claire said in a concerned tone. After a week of investigations, Detective Gatton has something to say to Madeline and her father figure friend of a lawyer, Peter Brooks. She met them at Madeline's place and they discussed her findings over dinner. She met them at Madeline's place and they discussed her findings over dinner. So far, this is what she had. Conversations with the three nurses who found Lumley dizzy in the hallway that leads to the pediatric center. So far, this is what she had. Conversations with the three nurses who found Lumley dizzy in the hallway that leads to the pediatric center. Selma's information about the woman she suspects must be responsible for Lumley's injury. Claire Didier. A conversation with Claire Didier, who stated that she didn't know and had never met Lumley before, as well as a conversation with two sales girls of a small convenience store near Lumley's residence. One of the young women, aged around 23, Rosa, said that Lumley used to stop by the shop in her nursing uniform after work. She got a few items, sometimes groceries and other times some snacks. Rosa claimed that she was like a friend to her, since they often chatted whenever she came there. However, she had not seen anyone walking with Lumley since she got to know her as a resident of the apartment block, about 3 years ago. The other girls said the same about her. No one knew of her personal life and the people within it. When Detective Gatton walked into the shop, only the first girl was around. Her name was Mimi. She claimed that Lumley looked familiar per the photo that Angela gave her. It was Rosa who instantly confirmed that she knew her. Then she asked if something had happened to her, and Angela replied in the negative, claiming that she had suffered a minor injury and they wanted to know if it was because of a case of domestic violence. If it was because of a case of domestic violence. Rosa seemed disturbed by it, and then said that Lumley was the sweetest person she had come across recently, and who would want to hurt someone like that. Rosa seemed disturbed by it, and then said that Lumley was the sweetest person she had come across recently, and who would want to hurt someone like that. Angela left the place after telling Rosa that she would find out. Angela left the place after telling Rosa that she would find out when she could visit her customer and friend, Lumley. Okay, so far this is what Detective Gatton has found, okay, so far from the investigations. she got to speak with two sales girls who work at a convenience store a convenience store near Lumley's apartment. Okay, so the conversation with Peter Brooks and Madeline continues. "Good job," Peter said, after hearing all that she had done and seeing the evidence for it. The conversations with the nurses who attended to Lumley when she became dizzy and collapsed were all recorded, as well as the conversations with the hospital administrator, Dana Westfield. Angela had recorded the conversations with the doctor too, Bismarck Brown, who attended to Lumley. Moreover, she had also had a chat with a toxicologist who ran the blood test on her main suspect, Claire Didier, that August 5, when she arrived at the hospital in the hysterical state after her non-fatal motor accident. Okay, so moreover, she also had a chat with a toxicologist who ran the blood test on her main suspect, Claire Didier, that August 5, when she arrived at the hospital in the hysterical state after her non-fatal motor accident. Dr. Mavis Gray was her name, and according to the results, Claire had been taking some antidepressants days prior to the incident. She found traces of 2 different types of the antidepressant in her bloodstream, and this was proof that she wasn't in her right mind at the time of the near-fatal accident. In addition, the man who had survived the incident had also given his testimony to the police about Claire's incognizant behavior, that she was driving towards him and didn't change her course even though he had continuously hooted the horn. There's something else you need to see, Angela said, after they had reviewed the testimonies. Consequently, she placed a digital pad on the table, powered it up, and then put in a small flash drive, and moments later there appeared a video of her conversation with Claire Didier at her office. The video confirmed what she had already told them, per the recorded conversation with Claire. Okay, so Detective Angela Gatton is still showing them what she's gotten so far from her investigation on Lumley's death. She looks alright, nothing suspicious, Peter said in observing it. I think she's a little nervous, Madeline remarked, staring at it. This is the first video I have of her. I took it in order to compare it with the next one I will be taking, Angela said, and they both glanced at her. Then she continued, I didn't tell her everything, the truth, that Lumley had died, but I would do so the next time I meet with her. Depending on her reaction, we'll get to know if she's telling the truth or not. Clever, Peter remarked, nodding his head. I believe she's the one, Madeline said, still looking at the video. We'll have to prove that before we even think of going to court, Angela said, and Peter glanced at her and then remarked, she's right. If she saw a smoking gun, then we need to prove it with evidence, else we won't have a case. Madeline glanced at him, a little worried by what he said. After the meeting with Peter and Madeline, Angela got home to an empty house on a Saturday evening. It was a weekend, but that meant nothing to Jason, who was still on the road. She got a soft drink from the fridge, and then sat at the kitchen table and began to savor it. She didn't appear tired, but her mind was. Inside were several notions of what might have happened to Lumley, that is, if her main suspect, Claire, were found not to be guilty. What did she think of her? Did she look like a criminal? Did she appear like a killer? No, she didn't believe that she was. She had seen the video nearly 10 times and studied it, examining her body language and her utterances. She had seen the video nearly 10 times and studied it, examining her body language and her utterances. She even took into account the time she spent in answering her questions. There was nothing to suggest that Claire was lying, especially given her mental state. She was panic-stricken when she came in. And even if Lamley had been around, she wouldn't have noticed her. Moreover, no one could confirm that she was one of the nurses who accompanied her on the stretcher to the emergency ward. Okay. Moreover, no one could confirm that she was one of the nurses who accompanied her on a stretcher to the emergency ward. Okay, so we are talking about Lamley now, okay? Angela has been asking herself, is Claire Didier responsible for Lamley's concussion and death? She doesn't look like a killer, no. Besides, why would Lamley, how would Claire Didier even recognize Lamley? Because at the time she came to the hospital, she was not in her right mind, okay, right state of mind. So it will be nearly impossible that she was able to recognize Lamley as one of the nurses who attended to her. Okay. There were about 2 nurses, according to Cassandra Deschamps, the nurse who treated Claire. When Claire arrived, those 2 nurses took her to the emergency ward on a stretcher. And inspected her for injuries, but they found nothing on her. There were no scratches or bruises, and no open wound. However, she was sobbing aloud and asking for her son, Benjamin, who was elsewhere in another room. Sandra Deschamps was 47 years old and had been working as a nurse at the emergency unit for about a decade. She had seen injuries of various kinds and had the training to address them. Claire's condition was also an injury, albeit not of the skin but of the mind, and Sandra did have the training for that too. She came in after the nurses had brought her to the emergency room and checked for any signs of injuries but could not find one. Subsequently, she began to apply therapy to calm down the shaking woman. After some minutes, Claire was no longer sobbing, but she was still asking for her son. Therefore, Sandra sent for him, and the two were reunited. The boy spent about 20 minutes with her until Sandra calmly suggested that she takes a rest. Consequently, a nurse came for the boy and left with him. Sandra claimed she administered a commonly used sedative to put Claire to sleep, and also she assigned a nurse to attend to her when she woke up. The nurse was Belinda Settle, a 32-year-old who had been working at the emergency unit for 5 years. Angela had spoken to her and asked about her relationship with Lamley, but she claimed that she didn't know her. "You mean you've never heard of her?" Angela said, looking puzzled. "No, I don't think so," Belinda replied in a casual tone. She didn't look concerned. "All right, fine," Angela said, and then paused to inhale. 5 minutes later, she said, "I'm a bit surprised that you don't know Lamley, because she used to work in this very department, the emergency unit. And yet you don't know her? You've never heard of her? That's strange." Belinda glanced at her and then softly smiled and remarked, "What is strange? What is strange is for me to know everyone. There are lots of us, maybe 50 or more. And we all don't work at a go. We run shifts. So how am I supposed to know everyone? That makes sense, technically, but Angela had her doubts. That made sense technically, but Angela had her doubts. Why would a nurse who worked in the operating room branch off to attend to someone in the emergency unit? Unless someone sent her there. However, she still didn't know who that was. 20 minutes later, she got up from the table, leaving behind an empty plastic bottle. She went into the shower and was out in an hour and a half. Subsequently, she went to bed. It was about 10 p.m. Hours ago, while she was at work, her husband Jason had called her up and told her that he will be home by midnight. It was a surprise call, since he normally communicated by text messaging. "All right, so what do I cook for you?" she asked, and then he chuckled and replied, "Just wait for me. I will be there." He sounded certain, but she wasn't counting on that. He sounded certain, but she wasn't counting on that. Jason was a busy man, and majority of the time he didn't keep to his word. Besides, she was in no mood for spending time with family. She felt she needed rest, plenty of it, and therefore she planned to have a quiet night all by herself. She felt she needed rest, plenty of it, and therefore she planned to have a quiet night all by herself, with her bed and her peace of mind. She planned to have a quiet night all by herself with her bed and her peace of mind. When Jason arrived an hour later, she didn't welcome him because she was far gone. She was too far gone in dreamland. He unlocked the door with a spare key and then quietly entered the house and locked it up afterward. Naturally, he unlocked the door with a spare key and then quietly entered the house and locked it up afterward. Naturally. He stopped at the kitchen and took out a bottle of soft drink and then finished it within seconds. Consequently, he left for the bath, where he washed his face and then filled the tap with some warm water. He went into a dark room and then turned on the light. Okay, so now we're talking about Jason, who is Detective Angela Gatton's husband, who's just come home at midnight, probably, as he promised he would. But Angela couldn't welcome him because she's already asleep. There was no one in there. Okay, he went into a dark room and then turned on the light. There was no one in there, just a bed and a closet, and a small study table at a corner. This was Angela's room, but she wasn't there, since she was asleep elsewhere, in their matrimonial chamber. This was the room she slept in when she arrived home late from police work. It was also where she brainstormed on cases. Earlier on, Jason was not a truck driver, but a teacher at a primary school. And their children did not live with Angela's mother. Rather, he stayed home with them after school. Angela's job did not permit her to have a regular time of arriving home. Thus, she took this room. Jason got his bathrobe, which hung on the door of the closet, and then left for the shower. It has been a month since Betty passed, and I have been at home. It has been a month since Betty passed, and I have been at home, pondering over the future of my professional life. A few days ago, I spoke with Belinda and asked her when she would be resuming work at the coffee house. She stared at me with a casual countenance and then quietly sighed. and then quietly signed. I was seated by her in her living room. She was still draped in black. I stared at her, waiting for an answer, but she only signed and then was quiet. All right, so now, if you could sense it, you could imagine, we are now speaking in Martha's voice, okay? We are back to Martha, and she's telling us it's been a while since she went to the coffee shop, which is still shut, and she went to Belinda's house. Belinda is one of Betty's friends. She went to Belinda's house to ask her when they'll be resuming work, but Belinda said nothing. Okay, I thought of what to say in order to break the silence and get a suitable response from her. Madam, can I start work if I want to? I softly said, and then she glared at me and replied, Is that all you think of? No, I wanted to say that, but I didn't. Okay, so Martha asked her, Madam, can I start work if I want to? I softly said, and then she glared at me and replied, Is that all you think of? No, I wanted to say that, but I didn't. I realized it wasn't a question to be answered. 5 minutes later, I said, All right, I'm leaving now. Subsequently, I began to walk away, and then she stopped me and said, I'm sorry, I'm just not in the mood to talk about business now. I smiled and then remarked, It's okay. Consequently, I left her alone. But I wasn't satisfied. I couldn't sit at home doing nothing. I thought of looking for another job, but a coffee house is the only place I want to be. Now what do? Talk to the others, Selassie and Anne? They had their own jobs now. Anne ran a diner, whereas Selassie managed her own convenience store at home. Anne ran a diner, whereas Selassie managed her own convenience shop at home. Who was going to help me run the coffee house? Who? After leaving Belinda's place, I decided to stop by Selassie's home and ask her about the running of the coffee house. It took me about an hour and a half to get to her place. She lived in the same town as the coffee shop, but that was a little afar. When I got to the place, there was no one at the shop. It was shut, and though I called out many times, announcing the presence of a visitor, no one came out to see me. I was desperate for help, since I had no intention of quitting my job at the coffee shop. Within me, I believed that we would soon be reopening, and everything would be getting back to normal. It was that faith that kept me going from one place to another, seeking help to restart the business. From Selassie's place, I took a bus to Anne's home. She was available and active at her kitchen. The diner was packed. She smiled on seeing me, and I returned the gesture, feeling happy that she was in the mood to talk. But I had to wait for close to 45 minutes before she could hear me out. We sat down on the veranda of her rented house, and after I sipped some water, I began. Madam, it's about the coffee house. I want to know when we will be starting work again. I said in a soft tone. I didn't look at her face. I just glanced at it once and then spoke the words. Within me, I felt a little nervous, wondering how she was going to react. I recalled Belinda's reaction and what she said, and thought, what if Anne said the same? Within me, I felt a little nervous, wondering how she was going to react. I recalled Belinda's reaction and what she said, and thought, what if Anne said the same? What if she thought I was being insensitive, running after money when someone had just passed? She said, and then I glanced at her, and then slightly lowered my head. she said. And then I glanced at her and then slightly lowered my head. It's true, what you just said. The coffee house has to reopen. But we are just not ready to go back now. Anne replied. Anne spilled it. Anne spilled it, and I quite expected her to say so. I gently nodded. Then she looked at me and added in a lively tone, "Are you looking for work?" I smiled because I wasn't expecting that. Yes, I needed something to do, I said in my head. Then I told her directly, "Yes, please." "All right, then come here tomorrow morning and help us serve the customers." "All right, then come here tomorrow morning and help us serve the customers," Anne said. Thank you, madam," I said, smiling the full length of my lips. So that is how I began to work with Anne. I was there the next day, as early as 6:30 a.m. But I wasn't the only one, obviously. Anne had a total of about 10 girls who assisted her. About 7 of them were waitresses, and the other 3 helped her at the kitchen, to either cook or do the dishes. I was the 8th waitress, and I needed no training, since I had waited at tables at the coffee house for nearly 5 months. As a waitress, I had to be quick with delivering the order, and also remembering what was ordered. I possessed both skills, therefore I faced no challenges. I chatted with the customers and bade them buy as they left. I even got some tips on my first day, totaling about $5. When I got home, Mother saw the joy on my face, and then she asked me why I appeared so. It was a good day, that's why, I said, and then she smiled and asked why it was a good day. I smiled, thinking of what to say. Well, we had a lot of customers today, that's why, I remarked, and then she left me alone. No more interrogation. I took a shower and sang throughout, and even as I ate supper, there was music in my head. Maybe I didn't have to return to the coffee house, I thought. I stayed with Anne, working as a waitress for about 3 weeks. I enjoyed the job, and the pay wasn't bad, around $20 a month. However, I was still waiting for Belinda to resume work. But it didn't seem that she was ever coming back. I realized this on the last week of that month of September, when I visited her at home. Belinda lived in a rented hall and chamber in a compound house. Belinda lived in a rented hall and chamber in a compound house. There were a number of persons about when I got there that day to speak to her about returning to the coffee house. I knocked thrice on her door and called out the customary way. I knocked thrice on her door and called out the customary way, "Ago," about 5 times, but she didn't open. So I knocked again, once this time around, because my knuckles were turning sore. When the silence prolonged, I realized that she was not around, but a neighbor told me more. Okay, so this marks the 160th page of the story, The Power of Coffee. At this point, we learned that Martha started working as a waitress for Anne, okay? Working at her diner as a waitress for Anne. And she was earning about $20 a month, which was a lot of money. She seemed happy about her job, but she was waiting for her boss, that's Belinda, to reopen the coffee shop so they could get back to work. But then she realized that she was never going to open the coffee shop. Okay, she was never going to get back to work because she visited Belinda one day at her work at home, and she learned that she had left town. So that's where we are now. So this is the 160th page of the story, The Power of Coffee, and we'll be back for the next 10 pages to make the 170th page of the story. See you then.